Most of you know the story. A brave dog named Balto saves a dying town. But that story is a lie. The real hero of the 1925 Serum Run wasn't the statue in Central Park. It was a 12-year-old sled dog who ran 261 miles in conditions that should have frozen his blood solid. In the winter of 1925, Nome, Alaska was staring down a diphtheria outbreak with no way out. The solution wasn't a heroic sprint. It was a brutal 674-mile relay across a frozen hellscape where the temperature dropped to 60 below. We've romanticized this event for a century, turning it into a children's fable about golden-hearted pets. But if you look at the raw science, the reality is far more clinical. These dogs weren't just loyal. They were biological machines engineered by evolution to endure what would kill a human in minutes. Today, we're cutting through the myth to look at the mechanics of survival. We'll examine why the dog credited in the history books was actually the wrong one, and how a Siberian Husky's metabolism, footpad architecture, and heart rate allow them to thrive where death is the baseline expectation. Stand in the middle of a negative 50 degrees Celsius Alaskan night, and you aren't just cold, you are effectively dying in slow motion. Imagine our modern Ledger explorer. He's outfitted in the best technical fabrics money can buy, clutching a thin, tactile notebook, ready to capture the romance of the trail. Within 30 seconds, the moisture in his own breath freezes against his lips like a lock. The ink in his pen turns to sludge, and the sheer, biting hostility of the air begins to seep through his high-tech layers, demanding a caloric burn his body simply isn't engineered to provide. He isn't an explorer anymore. He is a fragile, shivering heat sink in a landscape that views him as nothing more than a biological error. Now, zoom out. We are looking at a 674-mile relay route, a jagged, serpentine line scratched across the Alaskan tundra. This isn't a hiking trail, it's a death march. It stretches from the railhead in Nenana all the way to the suffocating isolation of Nome. When you visualize this distance, strip away the flags and the statues. You're left with shifting ice flows in the Norton Sound, massive, claustrophobic plates of salt-crusted ice that groan and heave like the chest of a sleeping giant. A standard sled dog team, reduced to mere specks against this vast, monochrome void, doesn't look like a hero in a movie. They look like a desperate, rhythmic pulse of life against an infinite white silence. Here is the physiological disconnect. Our Ledger explorer thinks he's fueled by a granola bar and a thermos of lukewarm coffee. He's operating on a fuel economy that keeps him upright for a Sunday stroll. Contrast that with the sled dog. We aren't talking about pets. We are talking about biological furnaces. To sustain that level of output, hauling a sled through blinding, crystalline dust, these dogs require upwards of 10,000 to 12,000 calories a day. It is an industrial-scale combustion of fat and protein. While the human body folds when the mercury drops, the sled dog's metabolism pivots, turning sheer friction and extreme exertion into a thermal output that keeps them from freezing solid. They aren't just running. They are keeping a machine calibrated at the razor's edge of survival, burning through a mountain of fuel just to stay ahead of the abyss that claimed everyone who couldn't keep the pace.
As we dig deeper into how these animals defied the physics that would shatter a human, keep in mind that the real story isn't in the maps, it's in the biology. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our breakdown of the metabolic engine that made the impossible possible.
The ink in his pen isn't just frozen, it's shattered, a jagged reminder that the environment doesn't negotiate. But while the modern explorer hits his limit, the Siberian Husky is just hitting its stride. To understand why, we have to look past the hero dog posters and into the brutal biological architecture of the breed. These weren't just good boys. They were the culmination of thousands of years of Chukchi selective breeding, a genetic optimization for an unsingular, harrowing purpose: survival through velocity. They possess a metabolic switch that defies canine physiology, allowing them to burn fuel as efficiently as a high-performance engine, tapping into fat stores that would leave any other mammal shivering in caloric deficit long before the halfway point. By January 1925, Nome was a ticking time bomb. Diphtheria was creeping through the isolated gold mining camp like a silent predator. With the harbor iced over and the plains grounded by the same atmospheric violence that would kill a man in minutes, the town's only hope rested on the telegraph lines and the endurance of men and beasts. The governor's desperate call for a great race of mercy was, in reality, a high-stakes gamble against biological failure. The plan was a 674-mile relay, a grueling chain of mushers pushing their teams across the frozen death trap of the Norton Sound. When we analyze the pacing, the myth starts to unravel. We've been fed a narrative that centers on the final stretch, but the reality was one in the earlier, more treacherous miles. Take Togo, for instance. While popular culture often puts the spotlight on the final leg, Togo, led by Leonhard Seppala, covered a staggering 260 miles. He navigated through the absolute nadir of the storm, crossing the shifting, treacherous ice of the Norton Sound twice. This wasn't just a run. It was a feat of raw, cold-blooded engineering. When Seppala handed off the serum to the final relay teams, the dogs were running on nothing but instinct and that strange, stubborn resilience that defines the breed. Then came Baldo, the face on the statue in Central Park. He gets the glory for the final 55-mile push into Nome, a sprint through blinding whiteout conditions that cemented his place in history. But if you look at the odometer of suffering, the heroics weren't confined to a single finish line. It was the collective friction of paws against permafrost that held the line between life and a graveyard, turning a series of desperate relays into the most legendary marathon in history. If you're fascinated by the mechanics of endurance, subscribe to the channel. We're deconstructing the most extreme survival stories in history, one detail at a time. These weren't just good boys. They were the culmination of thousands of years of predatory engineering, living, breathing machines optimized for a landscape that kills anything less than perfect. Forget the myths for a second. If you strip away the fur and the cinematic glow, you're left with a biological marvel that defies basic thermodynamics. Take the paws. In a human, exposure to negative 40 degrees would cause rapid, catastrophic tissue necrosis. But look here at the sketchbook. If we visualize the vascular network, we see something brilliant: a countercurrent heat exchanger. Arterial blood, warm from the core, flows down into the paw, losing heat to the returning venous blood that's been chilled by the ice. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. By keeping the core warm and the extremities just above freezing, but never ever frozen, the dog avoids losing massive amounts of heat to the snow. I'm pressing this chilled steel probe against the pad, and the response is immediate. The vessels constrict and dilate with a precision no prosthetic could hope to replicate. But the paw is only the landing gear. The engine is where the real alchemy happens. When a sled dog like Togo hits the trail, he's performing a metabolic flip that we're only just beginning to map. He doesn't just run on glucose like a marathoner. He's a furnace that learns to switch fuels mid-stride. As the glycogen stores dwindle, the dog's cells pivot, aggressively oxidizing fatty acids at an impossible rate. It's a clean burn. No lactic acid buildup, no fatigue-induced bonking. He is quite literally burning his own fuel reserves into pure, tireless kinetic energy. And that energy is directed with a kind of eerie, high-bandwidth proprioception. When Togo hit the Norton Sound ice pack, he was running blind. The gale was a white wall, visibility zero. Yet he didn't just guess the path. His brain was processing a constant stream of territorial memory, reading the subtle shifts in the ice's vibration through his feet, mapping the invisible terrain like a biological sonar. He wasn't navigating by sight. He was navigating by the very geometry of the frozen world he was built to conquer. If you want to see exactly how these metabolic blueprints compare to the peak of human endurance, check the link in the description for our deep dive comparison on the Apex Athlete series. If the paw is the engine's radiator, the bond between the musher and the dog is the control system, a complex, centuries-old interface. Long before the 1925 Serum Run hit the headlines, this wasn't a romantic partnership. It was a non-negotiable pact for survival, forged by indigenous Alaskan communities. For the Inupiat and Athabaskan peoples, the sled dog was never an accessory. It was an extension of the human nervous system, a biological necessity that allowed life to persist in a region that actively seeks to extinguish it. When the diphtheria epidemic struck Nome, we didn't just lean on technology. We leaned on this ancient physiological collaboration. But we have to be honest about the cost. History loves to paint these dogs as heroic volunteers, but let's strip away the sentimentality. The 1925 run wasn't a marathon. It was an endurance nightmare. It was a brutal test of glycogen stores, cardiac output, and sheer, uncompromising drive. These dogs were pushed to the absolute red-lined limits of mammalian physiology, running through blinding whiteouts where the temperature plunged so low that lungs could freeze. We asked for the impossible, and their biology delivered, often at the price of shredded pads and exhausted hearts. This event didn't just save a town. It shattered our arrogance regarding canine cognition. We watched these animals navigate invisible trails in total darkness, processing terrain through scent and vibration in ways that make our best sensors look like stone tools. It forced us to stop viewing them through the lens of pet ownership and start seeing them for what they truly are: high-performance, survival-optimized biological machines. When we look at the survivors, like Togo or Balto, we shouldn't just be looking for a tail wag. We should be looking at the most sophisticated engine evolution ever produced. A machine that turned the Arctic's hostility into a runway for human persistence. If you want to look closer at the mechanics of these incredible animals and how we continue to study their resilience, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We're diving deep into the science behind the sled in the next chapter of this series. History often paints the 1925 Serum Run in hues of heroism and myth, but beneath the legend lies something far more primal, a masterclass in biological endurance. These weren't just icons of the trail, they were engines of bone and fur, pushed to the absolute edge of what life can sustain. As we look back, perhaps the true marvel isn't just the speed at which they cross the ice, but the quiet, brutal perfection of an animal designed to never stop, even when the world demands that it should. The finish line was for the history books, but for them, it was just another mile. Thanks for watching.